In 1940, the world learned a terrible new truth. The age of the infantryman was over. The age of the tank had begun. As the German blitzkrieg shattered France in just 6 weeks, the United States, watching from across the Atlantic, was forced into a horrifying realization. It was catastrophically unprepared for this new kind of war. Its best tank, the M2 Medium, was a joke, a flimsy, machine-gun-bristling relic that was already a museum piece. America needed a medium tank, and it needed it yesterday. The result of this desperate scramble was one of the strangest, ugliest, and most compromised tank designs in history. Its own crews joked that it looked like a cathedral driving down the road, and yet this ugly duckling, this stopgap savior, would arrive in the hands of the British Army at the darkest moment of the war in North Africa. It would be the one weapon that could finally stand up to Rommel's panzers. This is the story of the M3 Lee and Grant, the awkward, ungainly, and utterly essential tank that held the line and gave the Allies the fighting chance they so desperately needed. To understand the M3's bizarre design, you have to understand the sheer panic of 1940. The U.S. Army, observing the war in Europe, knew its tank designs were a disaster. The M2 medium tank, their best effort, had thin vertical armor, and its main gun was a tiny 37mm cannon. It was hopelessly outclassed by the German Panzer III and Panzer IV. The Army knew it needed a tank armed with a 75mm cannon, a gun that could fire a potent high-explosive shell for infantry support while still having enough punch to take on enemy armor. The problem was that American industry had never produced a tank turret capable of mounting a gun that large. Designing, testing, and tooling up for a brand-new turret would take years, time the Allies simply did not have. So the Ordnance Department made a radical and desperate compromise. They would take the chassis of their new medium tank design, mount the powerful 75mm cannon in a limited traverse sponson on the right side of the hull, and simply place their existing, smaller 37mm gun turret on top. This two-gun, multi-turret concept was already considered obsolete by most tank designers, but it was a deeply flawed yet brilliant stopgap. It meant America could get a 75mm armed tank into mass production immediately, using existing components. The result, adopted in mid-1941, was the medium tank M3. The M3 quickly developed two distinct personalities, a direct result of the desperate needs of the Lend-Lease program. The American version, with its tall cylindrical commander's cupola mounted on top of the 37mm turret and housing a machine gun, was named the M3 Lee, after Confederate General Robert E. Lee. It required a crew of up to 7 men to operate its multitude of weapons. But it was the British who needed the tank most desperately. They were being hammered by Rommel's Afrika Korps in the North African desert and had lost a huge amount of equipment at Dunkirk. They placed massive orders for the M3, but as a more experienced tank fighting army, they requested a crucial modification. They designed a new, larger cast turret for the 37mm gun. This new turret eliminated the tall American cupola, creating a lower profile, and it housed the tank's radio. This allowed the tank commander, positioned in the turret, to direct both the vehicle and communicate with other units without having to shout commands down to the radio operator sitting in the hull below. This British version, with its 6-man crew, was named the M3 Grant, after Union General Ulysses S. Grant. It was these Grants that would arrive in the desert in 1942, just in time to face Rommel's greatest offensive. In May 1942, at the Battle of Gazala, the British 8th Army was on the verge of collapse. Their own Crusader and Matilda tanks, armed with small 2-pounder cannons that fired only solid shot, were hopelessly outgunned by German Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs, which could fire both armor-piercing and high-explosive rounds. But the British had a secret weapon, the newly arrived M3 Grants. When Rommel's panzers encountered these new American-made tanks for the first time, it was a profound and nasty shock. German tankers had never faced an Allied tank with a 75mm gun before. The M3's main gun could fire a potent high-explosive shell, which was devastating against the Germans' towed anti-tank gun positions, the deadly 88s and 50mm pack guns that had been slaughtering British armor for months. But more importantly, its armor-piercing round could kill a Panzer III or an early Panzer IV from over 1,000 yards away. For the first time in the Desert War, the British had a tank that could meet the Germans on equal or even superior terms. While its combat debut was not enough to win the battle outright, the M3 Grant's arrival was a crucial factor in stopping Rommel's complete breakthrough and stabilizing the British lines before the pivotal Battle of El Alamein. The powerful American gun had finally evened the odds. But the M3 was far from a perfect weapon. It was a machine born of compromise, and its flaws were numerous and obvious. First, the profile. The M3 was incredibly tall, standing over 10 feet high. This made it a huge and easy target on the flat, featureless desert terrain. A panzer commander could spot a Lee or Grant from miles away. Second, the hull-mounted gun. The 75mm cannon's limited traverse of only about 30 degrees meant the entire tank had to pivot its hull to aim at a moving target. This was a slow and clumsy process that exposed the tank's flat, poorly sloped side armor to enemy fire. To fight properly, an M3 crew needed to find a hull-down position, tucking the hull behind a ridge or sand dune and using only its main gun, almost like a piece of self-propelled artillery. And third, its riveted construction. Instead of being welded, the M3's armor plates were held together by rivets. When struck by an enemy shell that failed to penetrate, the sheer kinetic energy could cause these rivets to shear off and become deadly projectiles ricocheting inside the fighting compartment. The crews called this terrifying phenomenon spalling. It was a flawed, compromised design in every sense, and the men who fought in it knew they were in a vulnerable machine. Despite its flaws, the M3's story did not end in Africa. It became a global workhorse, a product of America's immense industrial might. In the hands of the U.S. Army, the M3 Lee was one of the primary tanks used during the invasion of North Africa in Operation Torch in late 1942. It saw action across Tunisia as American tankers learned the brutal realities of armored warfare against experienced German units. But the M3's most surprising theater of war was the Eastern Front. Through the Lend-Lease program, over 1,300 M3 Lees were shipped to the Soviet Union, though hundreds were lost when their transport ships were sunk by German attacks. The Soviets, who were used to the simple, brilliantly designed and low-profile T-34, were highly critical of the M3's many shortcomings. They nicknamed it the Bratskaya Mogila na Semerik, meaning a grave for 7 brothers. However, they grudgingly praised its high-quality American construction, its reliable Wright radial engine, and most of all, its powerful and accurate 75mm gun. The M3 Lee played a crucial, if unsung, role in stopping the German advance in the Caucasus region and was present at the pivotal Battle of Kursk in 1943. It even fought in the Pacific, where the 75mm high-explosive shell proved highly effective against Japanese bunkers and fortified positions. In the hands of the British in the brutal Burma campaign, it was one of the few Allied tanks available that could reliably take on Japanese armor. The M3 was truly a global tank. The M3 Lee and Grant was never meant to be a war winner. It was a stopgap, a desperate solution to a desperate problem. By 1943, it was already being replaced in frontline American service by the far superior M4 Sherman, a tank whose own development had been accelerated by the lessons learned from the M3's flawed but available design. The M3 was the necessary stepping stone, and yet, for one crucial year, it was the right tank at the right time. It was the tank that gave the British a fighting chance against Rommel when they had nothing else. It was the tank that put a reliable 75mm gun on the battlefield when the Allies desperately needed that firepower. It was the ugly duckling that held the line until the Shermans could arrive in numbers. It was not a great tank, but it was a good enough tank. And in the dark days of 1942, Good enough was the difference between defeat and survival. What do you think is the most underrated stopgap weapon of World War II? Let us know in the comments below. And for more deep dives into the machines of war, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell.